Hi, I'm Ryan from RTINGS.com. Today, we'll be doing a review of the Gigabyte M32U. We'll be evaluating it on our standardized test bench to see how it performs and if you should buy it. This monitor is one of the latest additions to Gigabyte's M series of gaming monitors, designed with both gaming and productivity in mind. This model is a 32-inch 4K display with a 144Hz refresh rate and a built-in KVM switch. It also has a few other extra features which we'll talk about in the review. The M32U has a somewhat understated design, without any features that would give it a more gamer-oriented look. The stand supports the monitor well, but is pretty large due to the monitor's size, so it takes up quite a bit of desk space. There's a gap in the back of the stand for more basic cable management, which is nice. It does offer decent ergonomics, but if you don't want to use the stand, the M32U has a quick release at the back which covers the standard VESA 100x100 wall mount. There's a pretty wide range of inputs with 2 HDMI ports, a display port, and a USB-C port. The HDMI ports are both HDMI 2.1, however they only support 24 gigabits per second of bandwidth. They are able to achieve the higher bandwidth requirements of HDMI 2.1 by utilizing display stream compression, or DSC 1.2a. This won't be an issue if you're using a modern graphics card or an Xbox Series X, since they both support this feature. If you do plan on using it with a PS5, do note that the PS5 does not currently support DSC 1.2a. So, if you want to take advantage of gaming at 4K 120Hz on the PS5, you'll be limited to 420 chroma subsampling. The M32U also features a built-in keyboard, video, mouse switch. This allows you to connect one keyboard and mouse setup to two different devices through one monitor. Just make sure one of your devices supports DisplayPort Alt mode through USB-C, then you'll be able to switch both the video source and upstream between two devices. Now, let's take a look at the tests. We'll start with the contrast. A high contrast ratio is important if you use a monitor in the dark for deep dark scenes. Like most monitors, this one has an IPS type panel. This has some trade-offs which we'll talk about in the review, but the major downside is a mediocre contrast ratio, and the M32U is no exception. Local dimming is a feature that controls the brightness of individual zones of the backlight. This allows for much deeper dark scenes in things like video games, as the area of dark objects can be further darkened. As a result, the overall contrast can be boosted. This monitor does have a local dimming feature, but it's pretty terrible. Since this is an edge-lit display, the dimming zones span the entire height of the display, which makes zone transitions very distracting and creates a lot of blooming around smaller bright objects in a dark scene. Do note that enabling local dimming does lock your brightness at maximum and enables the dynamic contrast ratio, or DCR, which noticeably changes the gamma curve. Now, a high peak brightness is important either in a bright room to counteract glare, or if you want brighter highlights and a more impactful image, especially in high dynamic range or HDR games. This monitor gets fairly bright in SDR content, which is good for when you're using the monitor in a moderately to well-lit room. Although it does get even brighter in HDR, it's still not quite bright enough, and the contrast ratio is not high enough to give a true cinematic experience. The local dimming feature does help to make highlights pop more, but does very little to help improve the contrast. Also important for a bright room is good reflection handling. The M32U has a hazy screen coating that helps to diffuse reflections and reduce their intensity. Overall, bright rooms shouldn't be an issue at all thanks to the good brightness and decent reflection handling. A potential downside of a hazy coating is if it causes smaller details like text to appear grainy. Text clarity is also impacted by a bunch of factors though, like the subpixel arrangement. Overall, it's great, as you can see in these images. The screen coating doesn't have much of an impact. The top photo is with Windows ClearType, which helps diagonal lines look clearer. Without ClearType in the bottom image, it's all right, but does lack some subpixel detail. Do note that these photos were taken with the recommended Windows scaling of 150%, so if you plan on using it with no scaling, the text clarity will decrease somewhat, but it will still be good. Good viewing angles are important to ensure details at the far sides of the screen don't look washed out. This monitor has decent horizontal viewing angles, as expected from an IPS monitor. The image only really starts to appear washed out at a fairly large angle. The vertical viewing angles are even better, so if the monitor is mounted somewhat above eye level, it shouldn't be an issue. An overall uniform screen brightness and color is important when playing video games, to avoid distracting areas that are overly dark or bright. This does vary between units, but we expect this M32U we bought to be about typical. The overall screen has a very similar brightness, which is great and shouldn't be an issue. In dark scenes, there is some IPS glow, as you can see around the edges of this photo. The local dimming does darken areas of the screen with nothing in them, but the difference between zones that are on and zones that are off is quite noticeable and distracting. Accuracy in the standard sRGB color space is important as it's the standard for computer use. This monitor has a specific sRGB color mode, which is pretty good as it clamps the colors for accuracy and to avoid an oversaturated image. It has great accuracy out of the box in the sRGB mode, though it does lock you out of almost all the picture settings except brightness. Interestingly, this also includes the overdrive settings. While in the sRGB mode, you're stuck with the Smart OD overdrive setting, which does have some noticeable overshoot. If you want to take full advantage of this monitor and display vivid colors in things like high dynamic range or HDR games, then the M32U is a decent choice. The DCI-P3 coverage is good and the tone mapping is accurate. The Rec 2020 coverage is only okay though. A high refresh rate is important for gaming. It allows the image to be drawn on the screen faster, which makes it more responsive. And if the monitor supports variable refresh rates, then you can get a smooth experience without tearing, regardless of the changing frame rate. The M32U doesn't disappoint. The 144 Hz refresh rate is among the fastest for 4K displays, and both FreeSync and G-Sync support means compatibility with new AMD or NVIDIA graphics cards. VRR will be extra useful on a 4K display like this one, since driving most games in 4K is very demanding on your GPU. When playing video games, a fast response time is important for the clearest image without distracting blur. The M32U has incredible response times at its max refresh rate, with quick transitions and only very minor overshoot in our recommended picture quality setting. If the frame rate drops when you're gaming, then luckily the response time is still excellent. Unfortunately, the picture quality setting at lower frame rates has a bit too much overshoot, so we recommend the off setting. If you want a set and forget overdrive mode, then we would recommend the off setting. It has slightly more blur at higher frame rates than picture quality, but there's no overshoot across the refresh rate range. If you really want the clearest image when playing fast-paced games, then black frame insertion or backlight strobing features are useful to reduce blur caused by the persistence of the image during a full frame. Unlike most monitors, the M32U can use both BFI and VRR at the same time with a feature Gigabyte calls Aim Stabilizer Sync. When both features are enabled, the backlight strobe frequency can match the refresh rate of your display between 85 and 144 Hz. If it falls below this threshold, the backlight simply stops flickering. The transition can be a little jarring, so we only recommend using this feature if you can maintain frame rates above 85 Hz. If you just want to use BFI on its own without VRR, then it can be activated at either 120 or 144 Hz. During our testing, we did run into a bug where the BFI did not turn off at any point in the refresh rate range, no matter how low we dropped the frame rate while VRR was enabled. Anytime below 55 Hz, the strobe rate would double its frequency and be flickering at twice the frame rate, which results in a lot of image duplications. Even above the 55 Hz threshold, when the BFI and VRR were working together, there was a very distracting brightness fluctuation that would happen if the frame rate was below the maximum of 144 Hz. Power cycling the monitor and PC fixed the issue, but do note that the feature might still have some bugs that need to be worked out. Now, a low input lag is really important for a responsive feel when playing video games, and this monitor is excellent. Just make sure you're on the latest firmware, since we have seen on other Gigabyte monitors that the release firmware had significantly higher input lag. So, this brings us to the main question: should you buy this monitor? Well, firstly, it's definitely a great gaming monitor. It has a high 4K resolution, high refresh rate, great response times, and great input lag. If you want high-resolution gaming on a fairly large screen, while also having a good productivity monitor with tons of features, then go for it. It's a great choice. Most of its competitors in the 4K gaming category are 27 or 28 inches instead of 32. If you want extremely similar performance in a slightly smaller package, then check out the M28U. It has all of the same features with similar performance across the board. If you want an even larger screen with a more impactful HDR experience, then it's worth mentioning the LG C1 that's available in its 48-inch size. It uses a different technology with an OLED panel and has more differences than I can go into here, so check out the video for more information. It's worth considering if you game in the dark, have the desk space, and don't mind the slightly lower 120 Hz refresh rate with less productivity features.